Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. Last week we got the axles for the Hercules Hobbies Reefer built, which means this week we make a start on the suspension and hopefully start putting the chassis together. Right, so we're on to step 2, where we're going to be building and fitting the leaf springs to the axles. Our first job is to open up bag 2 and separate out the leaves, mounting brackets and the nuts and bolts. There's quite a lot in there, and the leaves are very oily, so watch out for small fixings getting stuck to them. Since you've got 6 spring packs to put together, it makes a lot of sense to separate out all the bits. Each pack is made up of 3 parts. We might as well tidy up all the brackets as well. There's 3 left and 3 right L-shaped ones, and 6 U-shaped ones. That's going to make it a lot easier to find all the parts, rather than having to ferret around every time. To keep the packs together, we need 6 M2x6s and 6 M2 plain nuts. Okay, each of the spring packs are identical, so as usual we'll just build one here and magic the other one up after. All we need to do is start with the big bit with the loops at the end with the curved side up. Place one of the larger non-looped end bits on top, followed by a small one. Align the holes in the centre and drop in one of the screws in the middle. Flip the assembly over while holding the screw in place with a spare finger. Apply some thread lock to the exposed threads. We don't need a lot of it, just a little bit. Next is the nut. First we need to fit it so it's snug up to the leaves, so it's just starting to grip the parts. Realign the holes so they're spot on. We've got some M3 screws to go through them later, so if they're a bit off it will make life a bit of a pain. With the nut in a cross wrench, rest it on the bench so we've got something solid to press down on, and give the screw a good tighten. If you try and do it handheld, it's difficult to get the torque without slipping. That's about it then. Whatever you do though, don't be tempted to clean off the oily coating. The steel these are made from really likes to rust. The oil's going to help keep them sealed from the air. Just need 5 more and we can start fitting them to the axles. The spring and mounts are the same on all 3 axles. Even the steering axle is the same, it's just a little bit more fiddly. Okay, we'll start with the straight axle, for which we need 4 M3x30s, a left and a right hand damper mount, 2 E6s, these are the plastic bases for the leaf springs, 2 E11s, the bits that go on the other side of the leaf springs, 4 M3 nylock nuts, and 2 of the U-brackets. Pop 2 of the long M3 screws through the U-bracket and insert through the holes in the end of the axle. The straight axles don't have a right way round as such, but we might as well build them up so all the axles have the screw and nut in the middle the same way up. On the ends of the 2 screws we want one of the L-shaped damper mounts. Carefully check against the diagram to make sure we've got the right one and it's the right way up. Follow that with an E6. Next is the leaf spring. If you've got the holes perfectly lined up it will slide on nicely. However, as long as they're close we can use a screwdriver to pull the spring up the threads. It's not ideal, but it's going to do the trick. Next is E11, followed by 2 M3 nylocks. Now E11 has 2 hex-shaped holes for the nuts to sit in, so all we need to do is wind them onto the threads. But this is where the previous little workaround might cause a bit of fun. If we fiddle with the screws a little bit, undoing them until the nuts drop into the hexes and then re-tighten, we will just about get away with it. Now, looking at the manual, I'm noticing that the other mountings aren't just similar, they're identical, apart from the left and right-handed damper mounts. So, rather than having 6 minor variations on how to mount a leaf spring, I think it will be time better spent just to edit them together. I must say though, the steering axle does look rather funky with all its bits attached. Very nice. That's also everything in step 2, so it's time to move on to step 3. Looks like we've got dampers and the beginnings of the chassis. So the first job, as always, is to unpack the bag. We've got the 6 silver aluminium damper bodies, which leaves lots of small parts to get tipped into a pot. There's a few little sub-assemblies to this one, so first we'll assemble the dampers. Well, they're more friction shocks without the friction, but with an internal spring to really stiffen up the suspension. But we'll build them as intended for now. So we'll need the 6 little aluminium caps. They're all nicely machined. I reckon if you had them side by side with a Tamiya part you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference. 6 damper shafts. Unfortunately these don't have a nice little posi or hex head, so we'll have to use pliers on the shaft to fit the ball cup on the end. Then we've got 6 O-rings and the 6 springs, which just leaves the ball cups, which are 6 D4s. Okay, the kit doesn't come with any grease, and for the most part you'd probably get away without using any in the build. but there's a few spots where it's going to help things move smoothly and, importantly, reduce wear. So, since we just put together the Tamiya Grand Hauler, we're going to use what's left of its ceramic grease. There should be more than enough left. Grab an O-ring and a shaft and slide the O-ring over. This isn't acting as a seal, rather it's so when the damper unloads there's something soft to absorb the impact. Because we've got a plated steel shaft running through a hole in the aluminium body, a little grease is a good idea. It is a bit of a compromise, of course. If it gets run somewhere really dusty, the grease is going to pick up grit and make matters worse. Running in the average British car park, though, should be just fine. Getting the shaft and O-ring into the body is a bit tricky. The O-ring catches on the threads, but we're not worried about maintaining a good seal, so we can just use a bit of brute force to get it in. Next we can install the spring and a cap. There's no need for any thread lock here. Aluminium threads tend to lock themselves quite nicely with just a little bit of torque. A good tweak with your fingers should be plenty. That just leaves the ball cup. We need to grip the shaft with some pliers, and since the shaft's plated and runs through the aluminium, we need to be extra careful not to damage the surface. The standard trick is a bit of folded cardboard between the pliers and the shaft. Grip it really good and tight and thread on the ball cup. It would be nice if it was that easy, but as often happens the thread won't start. The first thing to try, which works more often than not, is to use a screwdriver to very roughly bevel the edges of the hole. Only ever do this on a soft plastic part though, or you'll ruin your screwdriver. Now the thread should take, thread it on until there's 0.5 millimetre or so of the thread visible. If it still doesn't work, an M3 caphead screw with a good Allen key can sometimes do the trick. Failing that, the ultimate solution is to use an M3 bottom tap to cut the threads. With the right tool, there's always a way to do it. With that little build repeated 5 more times, we've got ourselves a nice set of 6 non-dampers. Very nice. Chassis cross members now. We've got 3 D1s, 2 A5s and 2 A1s. First we need to put together the 2 front ones, which consist of an A1 and an A5, with 2 8mm self-tappers. The posts end up pointing downwards, so I'd guess they end up being the mounting points for the toolbox. It's a bit of a shame the 2 parts leave a bit of a gap, but they're not going to be visible when the build's complete, so I guess they'll do the job. Next we've got the D1s, there's 3 of them, all identical little assemblies. We'll need 2 M3x20s, 2 of these little damper collars, and 2 press nuts. These have a serrated side that digs into the plastic rather than the usual hex shape. Be very careful though, as a couple had extremely sharp swarf still attached from the threading process. The first negative point in the kit, I think. So we take one of the dampers and pop in a damper collar. It doesn't matter which way round at this stage. Next, insert one of the long screws from the side that's almost flush with the damper. Then the screws go through one of the holes in the cross member. We want the dampers to go through the side with a pillar moulded in. On the back we need to fit a press nut with the serrated side inwards. We need to spin it on until it's just in contact, then hold it in place until it bites. If you've got one with a sharp swarf, be very careful not to make a hole in yourself. Once it's biting the plastic, we can do it up really good and tight. For good measure, we'll use a little bit of thread lock on the exposed threads and loosen and retighten the screw to spread it around. I'm going to guess that these are going to be a bit of a pain to get at once installed in the chassis, so we really don't want them coming loose. We need to fit another damper on the other side using the exact same procedure. Then we can rinse and repeat for the other 2. So now we've got our 5 cross members ready to fit, we can get the chassis rails out. They're nicely made, all the holes look like they're well positioned, there's no sharp edges and the coating's even all over. Very nice. Of course, the real test is when we're mounting all the bits to it, to see if everything lines up. There is of course a little trick to building things like this, so we get everything nice and straight. When we put the screws in, all of them 8mm self-tappers, we want to leave them all slightly loose so the cross members can still move around. We need to go all the way around, installing all the cross members. The 3 with the dampers towards the back, and the 2 small ones towards the front, all with the screws left very loose. Now we can start in the middle and tighten up each cross member, working our way outwards. This will get us a nice straight chassis. To really make sure, you can hold the flat top of the rails against a flat surface while you do up the screws. Having a nice straight chassis will make the braces that fit on the ends a lot easier to install. They should line up with all the holes with no fuss. Well, that's going to do it for this week. A little bit of progress, but we do have the chassis ready for the next step. which does look a bit fiddly. It calls for 32 flange nuts, and that's got to be a recipe for a good time. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you don't want to miss part 3, and if you've got something to say, by all means leave a comment. Bye guys!